and lessons learned. So, Maestro, the floor is yours,
All
and
right.
we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, John. Uh, Good afternoon or morning or evening, wherever you happen to be in the world. I'm very happy to be with all of you to discuss this rather important piece of music that should be essential for every conductor. And before we start, I need you to know that beginning in March, I will have the first in a series of books. One will come out every 6 months. It's called Scores to Settle: What Every Conductor Needs to Know Before Stepping on the Podium. And one of the pieces in the book is this very work we're about to discuss. Those of you who have a lot of experience, fantastic, it's good. Those of you with maybe not so much, also good. So what I'm going to be doing is kind of walking you through what I've written, because it literally takes you from the first page right to the end with all the little tips and secrets and things that I've accumulated over the years in this piece. And when you start to learn a piece, we always think that we open the score. By the way, the score is from my teacher. His name was Jean Morel. There he is. And I don't quite know why he gave it to me, but he did. The reason I don't have another one is because my copy is on a wall back there, because it's only one of two scores I ever asked a composer to autograph, the other one being the War Requiem of Britain. Anyway, so we open the score, and often we think that we need to start when the music begins. No, score study starts before that. And it always starts, of course, with learning something of the history. Appalachian Spring, you have many, many options. We know that it's written and premiered in 1943, premiered in 44 at the Library of Congress. And we know, of course, that it was a ballet for Martha Graham, and called just that, Ballet for Martha. She wanted to have the name changed because she concocted a storyline. A lot of her ballets were abstract and didn't need that, and that's why he called it originally Ballet for Martha. The name Appalachian Spring comes from a poem, and it does not refer to the mountains of Appalachia or the season. It refers to a little stream flowing through. And the ballet is kind of about the building of a house in a small village. So we had this first version just for 13 instruments. Why? Because where it was premiered at the Library of Congress could only accommodate that sized orchestra. And the orchestration is a little bit strange. I'm going back and forth between what I wrote so I get everything right. The original is 4 violins, 2 violas, 2 cellos, 1 bass, flute, clarinet, bassoon, and piano. It was immediately successful. It was very important in American music because we were very heavily into the war. We needed works that uplifted our spirit, and this did the trick. But it was so popular right away that Copland immediately put together another version, the one that we're working from, for, I'm not going to say full orchestra, it's still somewhat small. And when you look at the instrumentation page, you see, again, not so much, and that a harp has been added, some percussion are in, two things are different. But most important, now instead of a 35-minute ballet, it's about a 23-minute distillation of the key elements. But it doesn't end there, because in 1954, Eugene Ormandy asked Copland to orchestrate for fuller orchestra the remainder of the ballet that he left out of this shortened version. And he did that. But he didn't do quite all of it, almost all of it. Then Boozy and Hawkes in 1970 decided to make this version for the small orchestra of the original group, 13 instruments. So you have that option. And then, yeah, finally, a few years ago, David Newman, part of the incredible Hollywood group of Newmans, including Alfred, Randy, Tom, all the others, he filled out the few remaining bars, and now we finally have a complete full orchestra version of Appalachian Spring. Um, Again, before we even get to the music, where do the instruments go on the stage? Piano and the harp and the percussion need to be somewhere near each other. That's important, especially when you get to the very ending, to get that harp harmonic and the percussion glockenspiel note together. If they're too far away from each other, it's a little bit tricky to do it. So that's the first piece of musical advice. And I want you now to turn to the very first page. I need to put glasses on for this. When we look at it, we see right away in the first bar a problem that you will confront in any piece that has divises. Let's talk about two-part divises. And in this piece, the divises are only in two parts. There's nothing larger than that. There are three ways to do divises. One, you do it by the outside player playing the top line, the inside player playing the low line. That's kind of the default that most orchestras go to unless they're told otherwise. Second way of dividing, by the stand. The first stand plays the top line. The second stand plays the second line. The third stand plays the top line, and so forth and so on. And the third way of dividing is that the first half of the section, let's say our section is 12 violins. Well, you have the first three stands, 6 players, they play the top, and the remaining 3, they play the bottom. A lot of this depends on the makeup and size of your orchestra, of course, but it also depends on the acoustics of the auditorium. For me, it's a very big issue because you can spend hours in this piece alone explaining to the orchestra how you want the divises to work. And it's a waste of time because it can be done in advance. And Copland does help us out a little bit here. It just requires thinking of it in a slightly different way. So you see in the second violin and in the viola, he says half. In Mahler, of course, it would have said Hälfte, half. What does it really mean? Half the section. Is it the front half of the section? Is it the back half? Is it still split on the stand? Well, what we know here is that as we move forward through the piece, you can see in bar 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th bar, it says half divisi. What does that mean? It means that within the half section you use, that is also divided. So let's say we go to our group of 12 violins. You're down to 6 for half, whichever way you decide to do it. And of those 6, then 3 play the lower line and the other 3 play the upper line. I guarantee you, you will save a lot of time in rehearsal if you can get your librarian or even yourself to mark in the parts how this works. So there's no question about how it's going to be. And the problem is that we have different ways of dividing things within this whole piece. So one set of rules doesn't work for the others. So what do? I do this as a front back one. And actually for me, I think I wrote here, my ideal size of the orchestra is somewhat smaller, maybe 10 violins. 4 basses is enough usually. You don't want it to be too big. Work can't sound heavy. It has to return a little bit to its chamber roots. There's another important issue to understand about divises. What happens when there's a page turn and there's a divisi at the same time? Think to almost any Haydn symphony first movement, some Mozart's. Where does that page turn occur? Right at the repeat of the exposition, doesn't it? And you've seen it often enough. The orchestra will be playing and half the section has to stop to turn the page back or to turn it forward. That's the argument, by the way, for dividing it 1 stand on top, 2nd stand on the bottom, 3rd stand on top. At least somebody's playing the whole time. So you have to think about that. Very important. It's also never a bad idea to actually look at the part itself. Look and see what the players have in front of them. The good thing in this piece is when it says clarinets in A, you have the clarinet in A in front of you. I'm not a big fan of scores in C, even though many composers today do that. I like to have in front of me what the player is seeing, because that way, when I make a reference to what they're playing, I can specifically say how their note looks on the page. I think scores in C are a little bit of an insult to us as conductors. It makes an assumption that we can't read a score properly. Well, guess what? That's what our job is. We have to do that. So we need to learn this is a skill. If you're not comfortable doing it, just work on your transpositions. Keep going. It's not as hard as you think. Clarinet in A is basically the soprano clef. And anything with the alto clef can apply to an instrument in D. There are tricks for learning this kind of thing. All right. So Copland himself was a conductor, not a great conductor, but adequate enough. And he left us some clues as to how to conduct this piece. Now, our first question about the actual conducting is in the first bar. There are 2 beats of rest. Do we conduct the 2 beats of rest? I think we have to when we read through it, and you have to give a very clear downbeat so the orchestra sees it, and then you get your violas and seconds in. But as the orchestra gets to know the piece better and better, perhaps you don't need to do that. You just look at the violas and seconds, and you start. Next problem, first bar. We haven't gotten very far in the piece yet, have we? You've got a slur, and you have 2 lines on the note. What? Wait a minute. Why is there a slur? Sometimes a slur is not what it appears to be. In this case, it's a bowing. He wants the 2 notes played in the same bow, but separated. This is another area, by the way, which, if you're a string player, always a good idea to have some idea of what bowing you would like. If you're not a string player, spend a couple months learning the basics, even with just open strings. Understand what it feels like to play a string instrument. Why? Because 7/8 of what you're going to say to the orchestra is going to be to the strings. And if you can have some validity as a conductor, an understanding of what they need to know before they play, you'll get more respect from your musicians. All right, so the lines probably mean slight separation, but only enough to retake the bow for the purpose of the articulation. Often conductors in this first bar will play these first 2 notes quite softly, but that doesn't really work when you look and see what he's got after this. He has a diminuendo in the second violins in the second bar, but none in the viola. The idea is, and let's assume that we're doing a setup where the violins are together and maybe the violas are next to the seconds and the cellos on the outside. That's a whole other issue for an entirely different discussion, how the orchestra sits. But let's assume it's going to be that way, or some variation, perhaps with the cellos and violas flipped. So you have to give those first 2 beats, bum, bum, bum. And then you take your second violins out very gradually, but make sure, try, if you can do it without saying anything, to sustain the viola so there's no diminuendo in that viola part. Very important. And if they do make one, then when you go back and start rehearsing it, explain, violas, you don't come down. And it's really true. It does work. It's just a little extra weight in those first 2 bars. Clarinet comes in. What does that mean? White sound. What do we think it means? Well, we don't know. Probably non-espressivo, just with very little, if any, vibrato at all, and just very calm and serene. Because it also says semplice, simple. It has to be just a sound in tune that gives us a feeling of stillness. In the 4th bar, you see the clarinet part has a kind of slur after the note or on the note going into the next beat, but it doesn't say what to do there. So what is it? It means the clarinet has the ability perhaps to last a little longer. Imagine the harp string ringing. That's what the clarinet's going to do here. The cellos come in. They're at single piano. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention this, and it's very important. Copland, like almost every other composer, does give us information, but also often he does not. So look at that second violin entrance. You see the diminuendo, but you don't see how soft it goes. No idea, none. So probably it just fades out a little bit so that the violas are left on the same octave. And then the cellos come in on the third beat. 3/2 bars in this piece are in 6, at least for the opening. When you listen to performances and you get to that 4th bar, often conductors will take a little breath before they bring in the cellos. I don't do it that way. I actually sustain them so that the cellos, even though it's an octave down, take over from the viola. So there's, to me, no break between the viola note and the cello entry. But we are with half. And which half are we talking about, by the way? To me, the front half, the ones nearest you. The sound needs to be close. Second violins, bar 5, pianissimo entrance. Really, they come in almost inaudibly, so we're not really aware. We hear the violas at piano, the seconds come in underneath them, and they emerge from the viola line. And now we start something that's very important for the whole piece. Skip to the bar before number 1. We have this 2-chord situation going on, an A major chord and an E major chord, right? How do we balance it? What I do with orchestras that I've never done the piece with is I will actually ask them, please, let's play the note just before number 1 together. We hear the chord, and then I try to balance it so that the two are equal. Otherwise, what happens, sometimes one note will stick out. Remember, and this is really important, the orchestra does not have in front of them what you have in front of you. You can see that clearly, but all the second violins see is a B natural. They have no idea the context. That's up to you to provide. So I play the chord one time and say this idea of the 2 chords is going to happen throughout the piece. Let's establish how we can balance it. That does, by the way, impact this orchestra setup business. If you divide your violins inside, outside, and the lower line, for instance, plays in the first violins the E natural, and the upper line plays the G sharp, remember, the lower line in that situation, they are sitting a little further away from the audience than the people who are on the outside. But if you divided it by the stand, first stand outside, second stand inside, that means somebody on the outside will always be equal to the person who's playing before them. So for me, that's important. We hear on the stage very well the arc of strings around us. And so we can divide it any way. For us, it's good. But we always have to think, what is it like for the audience? How can they hear this equally in this chordal structure? Okay. Next. Is the balance of the woodwinds and the horns and the trumpet. They're all doing that sort of pyramid chord that goes on before number 2. Just make sure they all sound equal. That's all. So in a funny way, you go, okay, that bassoon, it's a little loud for what the horn is doing. Copland's kind of written it to allow for that by having the bassoon at mezzo forte, but the horn is at single, is at piano, but muted. I don't know. It looks good on the page. Often you just have to make a decision on the spot. Is it really working? Am I hearing everything equally? At number 2, moving forward. Great. Doesn't mean anything. Just keep the tempo flowing. Many conductors will go into two here, certainly acceptable. You can do that if you feel comfortable. It's fine. But you can also stay in four. It's really up to you. These overlapping chords are going to be occurring all over the place. Copland does let us know by indicating certain things, which lines are solistic and which are accompaniment. It becomes very evident. So if you look, for example, before number 4, you'll see the chordal structures are pianissimo or something like that, and the melodic ones are written dynamically, a little higher, a little louder. So you'll need to do that. We should talk for one brief second about the mutes, going back before number 2. The default for trumpets is a straight mute, but there are 4 different kinds of trumpet mutes. There's Harmon mutes, there's cup mutes, there's bucket mutes, straight mutes. Even Harmons have the ability to pull out the stem and make a different sound. So you might want to be thinking about what kind of sound it is and what you might want. Could be different than the trumpet player decides on his own or her, up to you. Horns tend to be usually with not so much the metal mute, but with the softer one. There is a big difference, though, between consordino for the horns and stopped. Stopped is when they put their hand into the bell, and that's almost more for a pitch alteration. There's a color change, of course. It's what Berlioz would want in the Fantastique, to put the hand in to adjust pitches. Here, no, it's just a plain old mute. That violin solo at number 2, it's interesting. You put the violin an octave higher than the flute. And to compensate for that, you see he writes piano for the violin and mezzo forte for the flute. He wants us to create a kind of new instrument, one where neither instrument is prominent, but they both blend together. So that's important. To compensate for the moving forward, we get a retard at number 3, and then we go back to our original tempo at the odd tempo. That's fine. So we talked about this Divisi half, you understand. Right up until number 6, only half the section of strings is playing. Nobody else is playing. So the Divisis are all within that half, and you have to figure out who's going to play what. So it's kind of important as we go on. Why did I write this? I wrote, we have a slight dilemma 6 bars after number 4. There's a diminuendo following the single piano, but nothing to tell us how loud or soft we can be. Logic dictates we return to piano. So it's a kind of discrete subito piano, slightly louder than the final sound of the diminuendo that comes later. Okay, everything is fairly straightforward in that movement now that you know those basic things. The allegro itself is very sudden. How do we give it? How do we get that tempo? Normally, we could just wait. We've got the fermata. We should theoretically just be able to go ba ba ba, right? But to me, whenever there's more than one note for a beat that's subito, for a tempo that's subito, you need to give a second preparation. So boom, you have your piano, you have your violins, violas, fermata, 3, 4, ba ba ba, just for the security. At least one of these groups is going to be far away from the other one. So the more you can give a small gesture on 3, 3, 4, wap, ba, bam, ya, ta, da. And that's pretty much the way. And let's assume that Copland is pretty much right in his choices of tempo. I personally prefer it when a composer gives you the flexibility. For example, 160 is pretty fast. Maybe if he'd said 152 to 160 could be better. And acoustics determine this as well. The resonance of a hall can affect what the tempo will be. Fermata, you hang on to it. You kind of need to take a breath before the third bar. Yep, ba, 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 fermata, off. Yep, ba, 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 ba. You need to give a fourth beat that's both a cutoff and a preparation for the third bar. There's a diminuendo in the fourth bar, and you get the bassoon and clarinet and oboe. It's all clear. I can tell you from experience, after number 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, in the eighth bar, if you're just reading it through with an orchestra that really doesn't know the piece, and even some who do, somebody's going to come in on that downbeat. It always happens. So you're giving da da da, ya da da, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, ya da da. You keep your left hand up to try to prevent somebody from playing on that downbeat. Sforzando piano is the indication in the violins. Sforzando is usually relative to the dynamic that has come before. So we know it's a strong piano here, not a strong sforzando. But it's also one that needs to be stinging, very biting, because you have to get down in one beat so that the woodwinds at mezzo piano can be heard in low notes. So you ask your violins to start near the frog of the bow and pull very quickly to the tip. So it's like a sting, like that. It's very effective. Before number 7, 2 bars. Again, remember, most players don't know or don't have in front of them what the rest of the orchestra has. So your violins do not know that somebody is playing on the downbeat. They see an eighth note rest, but they don't know there's ya ba 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 ba. They don't know that. So you have to be extra careful, giving this downbeat very clearly, ya ta ta, but kind of holding your violins at bay so they don't jump and come in. There's also a tendency to rush, by the way, in these 2 bars because the line is going up. Let's see. Number 7, 1, 2, 3, fourth bar. And this is a little tricky. It's a little thing I do, and maybe it will help you. There's no diminuendo. You see that. But you see in the 5th bar that the violins, first violins, have a pizzicato. You know that they can't really sustain the whole note and get to the pizzicato the way it's written. Not possible. So they have to make a little cutoff to be able to achieve that. But also, if you look at these 3 bars, the 5th, 6th, and 7th, it's kind of hard to do without being scrambled to get from the pizzicatos to the arco, back to the pizzicato. The little trick here is very simple. I divide it. It's soft, so it doesn't need to be everybody playing. So I just have half the section play the pizzicato notes and the other half play the arco notes. Sort of bum, bum, ya, da, da. And you see there's a line in the violins on the arco quarter note. Again, they can't get to the pizzicato in time. So this kind of solves that. If you divide the violins and only have half playing pizz and half playing arco for the 3 bars. Number 8. What did I write here? Yeah, balance is everything at number 8. Really is. It's only single forte to start. And if you want to hear all the lines clearly, you have to stay at single forte. Nobody can be too loud. Everybody makes a crescendo as this passage goes on. And we get to the 2/4 bar before number 9, which is really a pickup to what's coming up. I think almost everybody can agree at number 9, you're going to be in 2. Da, 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 ya, da, 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 in 2. But you can also consider this 2/4 bar to be a preparation before that. You've gone ya, ba, ba, da, 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 ya, da, 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 1, 2, 1, 2. Here's a strange thing. I've never done it, but I've often thought about it. That trumpet note, the second quarter note of 9, it just seems wrong. Why are the trumpets playing 2 quarter notes when everybody else says da 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 ba on the tune? I don't know. I didn't have time to ask Copland about that. But one day, if I ever get around to it, I might take out that second quarter just because logic tells you that it shouldn't be there. So you're in 2, but the 5/4 bar should be conducted in 5. So that for 2 reasons. It's a little too much to try to cram in the 3 beats into 1. And also gives the people who have rests coming up, they know exactly where you are in case somebody gets lost. Number 10 can continue to be in 2, but you have to be really clear in the 3rd bar of 10. Again, through experience, I can tell you somebody in the violins is going to come early in the 3rd of 10. They just are. Sound drops down. We're at number 11. What I do to get into this, I've been in 2 up to here. And so let's do 2 before 11. It's going to be 1 da da ya da da 1 2 3 4. I subdivide the second half of the bar before 11 to establish the quarter note again. Have any of you realized that the timpani at number 11, this is the first note that instrument is played in the whole piece? So we'll assume timpani is sort of note, but it's not a bad idea at first rehearsal just to catch that person's eye, just because that's a long time to wait before playing a note. The 7/8 is pretty clear. It has to be 2 plus 3 plus 2. It's just 1 2 1 2 3 1. Keep in mind when you do compound measures like that, the smaller the upper number, the smaller your beat. So you do small beat, wider beat, smaller beat. 1 2 1 2 3 1. So it's always clear for everybody, particularly those who have rests. Because if you look at that 7/8, there's nothing to tell the winds who have a rest how the beat pattern works. They don't know. There's nothing that says 2 plus 3 plus 2. That's up to you to show as possible. What we're trying to do is make this efficient so that you can spend more time rehearsing the music and not the technique. That's up to you. After 11, 1, 2, 3 in the 4th bar, you need to give the strings just a little time to come off that crescendo of da, ba, 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 ba. They need to take a breath before the octave low note. Same thing after the A. Number 12 is a little tricky for balance. Just isolate the trumpet and the oboe, and what you'll see is something that goes bam, 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 bam. It's like it's one line, making us wonder why he just didn't leave the whole thing in the trumpets, but he didn't. And you can't change this one. But you need to have your oboes play in a like manner as the trumpets do. So the 4 bars of one phrase sounds that way. Now we come to another interesting thing where Mr. Copland doesn't help us, but I think we can figure it out. This is the section that starts right here after 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1 forte. Then look at the next measure, crescendo. And then look back at the 6/8. Nothing. Do we stay at the end of the crescendo, whatever that's going to be? I don't think so. I think what he implies here is that we always go back to the single forte. And he shows it finally in that second phrase, where after the sforzando, he does show it goes back to forte. So he's given that indication. He just didn't tell us early enough. Would help. I do the 6/8 in 2. Why? Again, there are people who have rests. They see 6/8 and they assume it's going to be in 2. If you started doing it in 3, not that, I mean, it can work, but the 2 is kind of nice to do. You have to be quite loud at the bam, 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 bam. That scale that goes down. Make sure everybody stops before the 4/4 bar that has the rest of a quarter note before everybody. And then the 4 bars are very similar. You go back into 2 around 14. But this doesn't quite work like it's written. The strings have to come down probably to pianissimo for the flute to be heard, not on the high notes, but as the flute gets down lower, about 8 bars or so after that entrance. So you want to balance carefully your strings and the flutes. The flute is heard all the way through, but you can be in half notes here. And you stay in half notes all the way, almost, until 16. Some of us, myself included, will actually let the flute take some time before 16. So it's gone ya pa 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 ya ta ta 3 4 ya pa pa, and then you do the next section. Let enough time pass so clearly a new section is coming up. 16 is an interesting place. It's the beginning of the serene portion of the piece, of course. We might think of this opening as being walking music, you know, that's what it feels like. But the balance is a little bit tricky. First bassoon, horn, and trumpet. Slightly intoxicated, like Billy the Kid, but it's there. And the question is balancing those three instruments. The bassoon actually has the note that should probably sound a little more than the others. It's higher, you'd think it should, but even muted, the trumpet and trombone can overtake it. But I let the bassoon come up now. As Copland tells us, it's exactly twice as slow at the 3/4. So it's 1 2 1 2 1 and 2 and da 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 da. Very clear. This absolutely heaven section that starts at 19. To 19. I can't read it. Getting too old. Yeah, 19. Now, remember, we talked about the difference between consordino and stopped. And Copland wants this stopped. He says quive. So he wants the hand in the bell here at 19. Different sound than before. Be careful about the intonation, though. Good solid strokes. Sustain all the notes in the 5/4 bars right to the end. And even you can think of making a crescendo on that pickup to the 3rd bar of 19. It's not the worst idea to just be able to keep it strong. A little bit of flexibility with the going forwards and the retards and so forth and so on. After 20, in the 3rd bar, first time we really see triple piano in the piece. Some conductors will do this non-vibrato. I don't. And the reason for me, it has nothing to do with historical performance practice. It has to do with non-vibrato by the mid-20th century is now a very special effect. And if we do it too soon, we won't be able to really bring it off near the end of this section where it makes sense to have it. So I keep a little bit of expression, not loud, but just with a little bit of vibrato so the sound isn't dead. Where is this? 5th bar after 19. What do I have that? Oh, yeah. 5th of 19 says press forward. So why didn't he just write poco accelerando? Could have. You have to decide what it means, pressing forward. Is it sudden or is it accelerando? You have to think about that. Another thing that is always unusual, I've written it this way. One of the most irksome things for me in all my musical life is trying to understand what meno forte means. Literally, it would seem to be less loud, but by how much? And in this case, you can just drop down to mezzo forte. So when you see the word meno forte, you need to be able to tell the orchestra what that means and give it a dynamic. Decide how loud or soft you want that to be. But you have to figure that out for yourself. 4 after 21. Let's see what that's about. Oh, yeah. 4 after 21, we have slurs and lines, just like we did earlier at the beginning of the piece. So it's not outright separation. What I think he wants here, it doesn't make sense all of a sudden to go da da ba ba, no, which is what we did at the beginning with the 2 notes. Here, it's just a rearticulation within the bow without really, it's ba ba. So there's a little emphasis on the 2 notes without separating them. Here's one of my favorite moments in the whole piece. Third bar after 22. That low B in the bassoons is so fabulous. It really works. It gives depth to it. In other words, the pedal point of the movement is just in that one instrument. The double basses are playing an F sharp. And here is where we can go to the no vibrato in the violins, giving it a brand new color. At the section marked fast, you cut off the bar before you cut off your flutes and clarinet. You wait. And because the oboe enters on the downbeat, remember how I said I don't like to give anything if there are two notes over one beat at the beginning. So even though the clarinets are cut off, I'm going to give the oboe 3, 4, ba, 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 da, da, ba. 132 is on the quick side, and a lot of this tempo is going to be determined by how comfortable your clarinetist is playing in the third bar. That's a very tough lick. It's really hard. And if it goes too fast, it's going to be a blur. All this section, when the takeovers occur in the woodwinds, you want them to sound as equal as possible. So you have the woodwinds just play 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the seventh bar without the oboe playing that long note. So you hear ya-ba-ba, ya-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba, da-da-da, ba-da-da, as if it sounded just like one instrument playing the whole thing all the way through. 23. When you look at 23, I've written that you have to look at 28. Now, why was that? Yeah. 28 is going to be a tempo change. So you have to be careful that 24 is not too slow. Don't slow down for this place. I can also tell you, again, from experience, more often than not, the second trumpet's going to be late at 24. Obviously, we can see it here, but the second trumpet is far away from the first violins, and the sound they hear is a little bit later than we hear on the podium. So you give a good look to that second trumpet and give, even anticipating the beat, perhaps pushing it ahead. Quite important. I remember seeing Copland rehearse this piece, and he used to talk about this section. He would go, perky, perky. He kind of laughed. That's what he kept saying for this. I wanted to spend a few moments talking to you about 26 and the bar before. In order for 26 to work, it's possible sometimes you have to wait the bar before starting 26, so the first beat is clear. And then back in the tempo. It depends, but it's often the right thing to do. Okay, so now we come to this problematic place, which is at 28. More deliberate, a little bit slower, and nothing you can do to give in advance. There's no way to prepare the orchestra for this. What you have to do after you've read it through and you come back and start rehearsing is literally start at this bar at 28 and just show them what tempo you want. And then maybe do the 2 bars before in the quicker tempo while they still remember what your new tempo is going to be. That's almost the only way to get it. So what kind of what kind of sound is going on here at 28? It's kind of like country fiddling to me. And I do it on the string, even though there are dots there. And I do it all, as we say, as it comes. There's no reason to retake any bows, but sometimes you'll see a quarter note come on the last beat. When it comes on an up bow, make the note long. So ya ba 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 on down, then ya ba 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 ya ba ba, and you get a lot of style and a lot of character here if you do it that way. It also saves a lot of hassle having to say which bars to take 2 down. So there'll be 1 or 2, but generally it works just fine if it's as it comes. At 29, you want to emphasize that accent. Da-da-dum, ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum, ba-ba. I can also point out something that's important at 29 in the snare drum. It says on the rim. You may not be aware of this, but in Copland's time, the rims of snare drum were still made of wood, not metal. And it's a different sound when you play on the edge, whether it's wood or whether it's metal. Same thing happens in Billy the Kid also. There's nothing wrong with playing it on the metal, but the wood is a kind of different sound. So you might want to consider that. You know that you kind of have to get back to the quicker tempo, probably by 30. So either do it as a subito or lead into it. But it's important not to let this whole thing get too slow. That I think needs to move ahead. And you'll need to bring everything out. 31, let's look at that. And what we're looking for here is to balance, obviously, all the instruments. So you're bum, 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 bum. And what is it that's missing in the 5/8 that's difficult for us all to hear? It's the eighth note in the 5/8. You want to hear bum, 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 ba, ba, bum, 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 ba, ba, ba. Bring out that one note, the eighth note, so it's clear. And also the landing note, the last one. Bum, 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 ba, bum, 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 ba, ba. The beat pattern is not a problem. 33. The two bars before look something like this. Bum, ba, bum, bum, ba, ba. Hold your hand up. 2. Yum, da, da. I wouldn't beat it out. I would just wait. 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Wait. But use your left hand to bring everybody back in. 33. Okay. Now, I don't know which edition you have, but I wrote a note here. You might find that in some of them, in where? Some of them, the trombone notes are different in the third bar of 33 than, say, the double bass and cello. You might want to check because that's been an error that has happened over the years in the different parts. It certainly, some might say A, C sharp, D sharp, E, and some are A, B, C sharp, E. Just check to see that they're the same, whatever you do. At 35, okay, this is technically the hardest thing in the piece. The first problem, of course, is how do we set that up? You've gone the bar before 1, 2, and you wait, everybody's off, and 1. So even though it's not quite clear, you use the fourth beat of the bar before 35 to show the tempo that's coming up. 1, 2, 3, and off. Bum, bum, yeah, like that. The claves, I have to be careful here because sometimes the claves will produce a pitch. And if there's going to be one, it should be an E flat. But try to get a set of claves on the high side, but that are devoid of an actual pitch because it can interfere with that E flat sound you need. Just like we talked about in the earlier things, anything that's a smaller division, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Yap, ba, ba, ba. Your 3/8 has to be larger because it's the most beats contained. Yap, da, 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 ba. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, da, 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 da. Small beats, very clear, very precise. Now comes my, I'd say, second best trick to solve a problem. Getting into the presto at 37 is a nightmare. It's a nightmare if you do the bar before 37 in 4 to make the cello rondo. It is not a nightmare if you go into 2 before 37. So let's look at the 4 bars before. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, cha, ba, 2, 1, 2, and you're there. So the orchestra's seen 2 bars, violas in particular. They see the 2 bars, and everybody else does as well. Let me review that once more. 4 before. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and you're there. I guarantee you, this saves a lot of trouble in rehearsal. It can take forever to rehearse this place. Okay, stay in 2 for all this. Interesting set of dynamics before 39. Watch where the crescendos are and who arrives where at what time, because they change. Okay. Some go to a fortissimo 2 before 39. Some go to the fortissimo in the middle of 2 before 39. It's important. The tempo of this section, to me, is determined by the double bass part at 39. Now, I know you're not thinking about that when you start the section, but there's only so many notes they can get in pizzicato at 39. So don't be so fast that they really can't play that. It should be audible, and you need to hear it. At 40, the sforzando here is really just an accent. It just helps emphasize the accent. That's all it does. Okay. 41 is a little strange. What I do is I try to bring out the notes that are changing. So if you look, for example, at this second trombone and the low strings, da-dum, bum, ba, the scale that goes down. But in the next bar, you see that the lower notes in the violin, they change. And then in the next bar, they change. So I don't I try to bring out those lower notes so we can hear a difference. Okay. We're pretty loud here at 41, but we still have to make a crescendo before 42. It's slightly cheating, but the 2 before 42, I drop the dynamic down just a little bit so I can make a bigger crescendo. And the rationale is exactly that. If you're already too loud and it's the same instruments playing, there's nowhere to go if you're loud before. Should you be in 4 or in 2 at 42? There are a couple ways to think about it. Let's look at 2 before 42. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, ya ta ta, 1, ya pa pa pa. Certainly you can be in 2, but you can also do 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, ya pa pa pa, and then go back in 4. It's whatever you're most comfortable with. Just make sure it's clear to the orchestra to do that. 43, just make sure your subdivisions are clear. Again, a little bit like earlier, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In the 7th bar, you can do the 6, 8, and 3. I don't recommend it, but again, the reasoning being that some people have just a rest in that bar. They see 6, 8, they expect 2 beats. And these days, it's not so hard, really, is it? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, ya, ba, bam, ba, bam, 2, 3, 1, like that. I just think it's a little easier, always more efficient if you can do it, to stay with the indication from the composer unless they've outright made a mistake. For that, you look at Stravinsky in the Rite of Spring and you see 6/4s where they're clearly not 6/4s, they're 3/2s. So this is kind of like that. I would do the figure at 44 in 1, staying in that 2 beat all the time. Try to balance this section as easily and comfortably as you can. It's a little trick for me. 2nd of 46. I do a forte piano for the violin harmonic just because I like the sting on that. It's a nice little color. Certainly you don't have to. And the composer, well, he didn't say anyway. I just find it's effective. Not the best piece of writing after 48, is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the trumpet to get that. Yeah, da, 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 da. One day, if I ever get up the nerve again, I think I will redistribute the way the trumpets are written so you actually can hear the 8th notes alternating, since it kind of parallels what the violins have. It's not worth spending a lot of time on this. It's never going to sound right, and you'll never hear it the way it looks like it is on the page. It's just not going to happen. Okay, let's jump over to 50. Most of us think that the ending of the 5/4 is already in the slower tempo. Dum ba bum ba 1, 2, 3 da ba ba bum ja ja, because he writes the more deliberate tempo, but he only writes it, we assume, at where either the dotted line is or for the downbeat itself. It's hard to tell. I prefer just to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, ja, ba, 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 ja, ja, just to be a little bit slower and heavier. And then I continue to be pesante in the 3/8 before 51. Jump, bum, 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 jump, jump, wait, 2, 3. Da, da, da. And like the beginning, the violin is an octave higher. In this case, it's the oboe instead of the flute. Brittle in the harp means non-arpeggio. Just don't separate them. 52, your 3/2s should probably be in 6. 53, now we have that opening pyramid chord thing going on, but now everybody's playing. 54, I do a little louder than mezzo forte because I want to come back up in the third bar. Dum, bum, 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 bum. And then I take a breath, like, Amen, which is going to come up at the end of the piece. 55, just be careful that your tempo is not too fast. Slightly move forward at 57. This is a really tricky passage for the oboe with the high notes, very difficult. Balance the harp and the piano and the glock over at 59. Just make it nice singing for them so it rings, but not too much. If you've gotten to the right tempo, 62 works just fine. Bam, ba bam, ba bam, ba bam, ba yum, ba 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 ba. But there is something before 62 you have to pay attention to. 6 bars, that double bass entry. It's helpful to rehearse the cellos and the double basses one time to get bam, ba bam, ba bam, ba bam, ba ba together. So that's 6 before 62. You're in 1 at 62. You ask, and remember 1 forte only, not fortissimo, but your violins and violas on those scales as much as possible. It's up to you after those scales, whether you want the quarters long or short. People do it both ways. 64 is a little tricky. Again, if it's going to slow down, it clearly has to slow down from the upbeat, right? It can't go, no. So I actually do it in 2. Most people do it in 1, but I find going into 2 is better, right from the bar before 64, just to keep it settled. 65 is all clear, nice and majestic. At 67, what you have to do is make the fermata long enough for the strings to be able to get their mutes on, right? So you might have to tell them you need to put them on somewhat quickly. 67 is a series to me of prayers. So I take breaths. Da, 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 ya, da. But what's a little difficult, and we need to look at it, is before 68. 2 slurred notes, 2 bars before, and lines on each note. So for me, this means da, da, dum, bum, bum, that they're separated. Little bit, not much, but a little separation. You'll also notice that it's triple piano at 67 with the mutes. Yeah, but there's still a kind of warm feeling to it. So I never place it so distant that it sounds almost inaudible. I keep it a little bit to the forefront, a little bit. But those separations at 68 and then the one before 69, that's really important that everybody does it together. Often the basses will forget to do it, especially for the one on the A naturals. Even in the winds, breath, breath, breath. You have to be very careful because the breath has to be shorter than a quarter note, but a little separation. Now, you don't have to. You can do it all in one line, and it's perfectly fine. I just prefer it. 71, we're in slow 3. I think I understand why he wrote half for the string section, but really it's the end of the piece. If you can get the whole string section to play really softly, it's unbelievably effective. So I don't really observe the half here. Still with vibrato. One nice little color that I think is interesting. I have the violin when it says solo, play a little bit above the flute. Da, 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 da. And then the next phrase, 5 before 73, I have the violin recede and now balance more with the flute. So it changes the color slightly. All right. Now we come to a place which has been corrected in recent versions, 2 before 73. If you followed it exactly as it's written, you would go dum ba bum 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 1 2. If you had the quarter equaling the quarter, it wouldn't work, would it? It would be too fast. So really, what it is the half note now equals the quarter. Da da 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 4 1. It makes more sense to do it that way, and Copland does it that way himself. Back to that white tone we talked about, and now we come to a couple of nice things you can do at the end. The last 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 bars. Each entry of this pyramid chord thing is piano moving above the pianissimo. So you bring out the cello and the bass, or the cello. Then you bring out the first viola note. Then you bring out the C natural, and then the second, and then the upper second, and then the first. So they all wind up at single piano with that balance of chords. So again, like the opening, you play the first fermata with everybody and say, okay, this is what we're trying to get to. This is the result of the chord. So when you make your entrance, you have to balance with everybody else. We're still vibrating at this point. Remember how I said you need the Glock and the harp next to each other? Even so, it's still hard to get together. So the trick is this. Here's your first fermata. You're sustaining your strings a little bit, and you look at the Glock and harp, and I do this. I give 3, 4, boom, like that. And then the second one, 3, 4, boom. I start the diminuendo in the strings, and then I give a last 3, 4, boom. And the last one of the harp and Glock played a little softer. I mean, why would he put a diminuendo in? Of course, it's going to be a diminuendo. It's the harp and the Glock. So I think I do it a little bit softer. And here's the really good one. And you can use this in a lot of pieces. You do your diminuendo in the last 2 bars. When you get to the last bar, everybody's still vibrating. You turn your left hand over so it's kind of flat. And at that point, the strings go to a no vibrato. I can guarantee you, you will have the most incredible pianissimo you've ever had in your life when you do that. It really works. You can only do it once per piece, probably only once per concert, because it's such an extraordinary effect. It would lose its effect if it's done a second time. One could go through this piece bar by bar, but we took enough time here. And I'm happy to stay. It's not a problem. The couple conducting competitions I've judged, and I don't like doing it. I have to do it one more time. I've always asked for this piece to be on because I think now it's in the international repertoire and it contains almost every problem that a conductor has to face. Everything is in that you need for the most of the repertoire. I mean, you could do Petrushka and you could do a couple others, but no, this one serves a good effect as well. It's mostly about the mood. You don't need to have a story. You can create your own story if you wish. It's perfectly fine. As I said, I think using really a big size string section, I really wouldn't go more than 10 first violins, maybe even less. 10's about right. But you can go smaller. You really can. It's a marvelous piece to do. And if you do it right, when you finish, maybe the best way to say it is I consider this piece if any one piece has to represent what America is about, to me, this is the one. Because when it ends, it's this sound of cautious optimism. I mean, it doesn't exactly end in C major, does it? It ends indefinite with the two chords. So we're not sure what's coming next. And here in this country, we have no idea what's coming next.
Maestro,
Right,
thank you so
let's
much.
open it up.
This was incredible. And, you know, having recently conducted it, and you were there.
I was there.
To hear it. You know, this piece is always a revelation for every conductor. And you have given very clear guidelines and understanding how any conductor can navigate what are some of those technical challenges and tempo changes, and where you can have some little tricks to make things more effective. Because ultimately, as conductors, our goal is to help the musicians be as effective as they can be in being able to perform the music.
Well, let me
so
one last thing before on that very subject. These days, you have to be efficient in rehearsals.
Yeah.
Don't have as much time as we used to. So everything you say, everything you do with your gestures is all for the sake of getting to the music. And believe me, more often than not, as young conductors, you're going to run out of time at the end of the rehearsal if you're not really as clear as possible. It's all about time management. Rehearsal is just that for us.
Absolutely. Now. That's a whole masterclass unto
itself.
It is. Maestro, I do have a question for you, because what I have experienced, I think I've conducted this piece maybe even 30, 40 times, but literally every single time I've done it, when the violas come in with the Simple Gifts melody, they're always too fast. They're always playing in one rather than two. Yeah. Why is that?
I don't know.
Is there something in their parts? Have you ever encountered that as well? It's at 59, rehearsal 59.
Well, it hasn't really popped up with. I'm trying to see why it might be when the violas get it. Well, maybe they don't hear the accompanying figure underneath.
I would have thought that they would have heard the harp, they would have heard the glockenspiel, the pianoforte.
But think about it. The likelihood of those instruments being on the same side as the violas is minimal.
That's right.
They're on the other side. And
that's right.
Maybe one can help it a little bit by having the second violins play a bit louder, maybe. But yeah, I can see where that can happen. And remember, they've heard it in the clarinet,
right,
where it is twice as fast.
Right.
And so perhaps they're influenced by that if they don't know the piece.
That's probably the answer. I know Creston, he gave a question. Creston, would you like to ask your question? You need to unmute your microphone. There you go.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you well. Where are you outdoors? Are you outdoors? Man, are you outside?
No, well, I was earlier this morning.
Okay.
No, I'm in this kitchen now with my cousins. I had to do this remotely.
Okay.
So ask your question.
So my question is, how do you keep your ears fresh? What strategies do you have for us, for like young conductors, to sharpen those ears?
I'm not exactly sure. If you're a young conductor, they will automatically be fresh because you're encountering much of this music as a conductor for the first time. So what happens with me, John mentioned he did it 30 times. I can't even tell you how many. Between this, American in Paris, and Barbara Adagio, I can't tell you which I've conducted more of the American music. I guess I just remained inspired by great pieces of music. And no matter how much I can impart to you, for example, whenever I open the score again, I'll always find something I didn't notice before. Always. It's never ending. And maybe that's the secret for any musician. I have a phrase I use, that there's no such thing as perfect in music, because if there was, why would we come back and do it the next day? Because we're always searching for something. And I don't even want to call it the truth, because that's not the right word. It's there are two things that happen with me. One, I'll do the piece. I'm not a music director anymore, so I'm not going to repeat a piece with an orchestra. But when I did, it was always coming back to say, how can I make this better with the group that I've done it with? But if you go on tour, for example, and do this piece and you're going to play it 8 times, how do you make it different each time? Well, you don't purposely do it. It's going to happen anytime. It's going to be that way. But if I see an orchestra that's never done it, I become the teacher of the piece automatically. And that's, so you're in two roles. You're always looking for how can I improve on what I did before? And two, how can I get this across? So in 2 weeks, for example, I'll be in New York with the Manhattan School, and we're doing an American in Paris. So none of these kids will have played American in Paris. And we're going to talk about that next week for those of you who are coming on. And there's so many questions. And now Appalachian is different. It's pretty well laid out in terms of the style and how we play it. But American in Paris, what do we do? Do we replicate the style of late 1920s, or do we change everything? Do we move the rhythms around? I think a lot of it is just the music itself keeps me fresh. I know it sounds like a cop-out answer, but it's the only thing I can think of. It is an interesting question, though. I think the time comes, if I ever walked out and went, I'm bored with this, I think I would stop conducting if that happened. I really do. And I'm 79 now, so it's probably around the corner anyhow. Although as Mr. Blumstead, he seems to be just fine.
Yeah. Maestro, if you would share with us, speaking of the aging process of conductors, would you share with us what you shared with me, this remarkable story of Aaron Copland?
So, Copland is so interesting. We often refer to him as the dean of American composers. Probably not the right word, but here was somebody born in 1900 and died in 1990. He literally saw the landscape of American music for the concert hall evolve. Remember, when he's born, nobody knows Ives. There's no American sound in music yet. It's still based on its European ancestors. We haven't had yet the influx of ragtime, jazz, swing. None of this has happened yet. Nothing. We're hopefully relying a little bit on our folk music and indigenous heritage, but not much of that was happening. Dvorak told us, he warned us we should do that. Finally, we're getting around to it. This is good. So Copland, the last 15 years of his life, really was very ill. Call it dementia, Alzheimer's, whatever. And often people would go visit him in his home in Peekskill, New York. And two dear friends of mine, one John Corigliano, who I suppose most of you know, the other the conductor Murray Sidlin, some of you will know who he is. They went up to see him. And why did they go? Copland was incommunicative. He couldn't speak. And he just sat there. But everybody wanted to be in the presence of the idol. Copland for composers, Bernstein for conductors, of course. Well, they got there one afternoon. They're exchanging stories. And all of a sudden, Copland gets up from his chair and he ambles over to the piano and he plays E, G, C, D, G, E, the chords that end Appalachian Spring. And then he sits down. And both John and Murray have said at that moment, it was like he was telling us what his life had meant and that it's summarized in those chords being placed together. And that's what he wanted to be remembered for, this cautious optimism I mentioned earlier. I mean, even telling whenever, and I tell this story a lot, and every time I do it, I can only imagine what it must have been like to be in that room when that happened.
Wow. Well, we are very fortunate to be in this virtual room, to have enjoyed your understanding and perspective and stories and secrets about this very important piece of music for every conductor. And I encourage all of those who have attended. Some of you, many of you will be with us next week for American in Paris, and we're going to be spreading the message out on media and to be grateful for the opportunity to have this access and education with a great Maestro, America's music director, as you've been called,
well,
to be able to go deeply as a conductor into this great American classical music.
And next week, I'll hope to spend a little more time allowing you. First of all, I won't be late getting on with it.
It's okay.
I need to hear more from all of you, but we have a lot to talk about next week. That piece is so hard. You can't believe how hard.
Absolutely. Just getting the first violin to swing in the first place is a hard enough thing. Look, we have a few people who have been participating with us. Michael Chang, I see, who was our first prize winner in Bucharest this past year. Jonathan Snowden, Debbie Quo, Enrique Gavalda, all participated in Bucharest. It's great to see them again. Ian and Creston, it's very nice to meet you through this. I would look very much forward to having you return. I'm very happy Leanne was able to join us as well. So if any of you have any questions, feel free to let me know. I can forward them to Maestro. He has your biographies. He knows who you are. I'm sure at some point he'll be hearing about you in the future in your own conducting careers. And this is a recorded masterclass, so both Maestro and all of us will be able to refer back to this in the future when we are conducting Appalachian Spring. Maestro, thank you again for your time. It has been indelible, unforgettable.
And for next time, just so you all know, I'm writing all these books, and the next book that's not the score study one, it's called Don't Call Me Maestro.
Thank you, Leonard.
Okay, there you go. Got it. Hey, take care, everybody. See some of you next week.
Shana Tova. Happy New Year.
Tova.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.